I'm David Blunkett, a former member of Tony Blair's cabinet for 8 years, and I'm in conversation with Sir John Major, who was Prime Minister of the UK for 6.5 turbulent years in the 1990s and has been generous enough to give his time to talk about his background, his aspirations of the past and his view of the future. And John, what you and I have in common, which you might not be aware of, is that both of us relied on further education, on lifelong learning to get us to where we were. And I just wondered if you'd say a little bit about your own background and the way you came into further education, distance learning, the things that you were doing at that time.
It was pretty essential for me to do learning after school because, to be frank, I learned very little at school. I left school just before my 16th birthday by, I think, mutual consent between the school and I. So I left, and there was a great deal to be done afterwards. And I realised there was a limit to what you could achieve without further education, both in terms of personal life and professional life. And so I began a series of correspondence courses, firstly to fill the gaps in my school education, and then to gain a professional qualification, in my case banking. And in those days, as I seem to recall, there were 10 different papers covered economics.
And it was very respectable in those days as well, wasn't it?
It was a very respectable profession then. These days, to be a banker and a politician is a dangerous combination.
And what inspired you? I mean, because we're here talking about young people and the future. What inspired you?
Well, I think two things, really. Firstly, without education, there's a glass ceiling. There's a glass ceiling both on what you can achieve in terms of satisfaction, also what you can earn. And although in a mercenary age money is by no means everything, it does ensure a better life, a better home, better opportunities for your own family, so it's not something you can turn your back on. And I realised without a better education, having left school at 15, coming from the background I did, there was no future without learning and without gaining some qualification, and then, crucially, accepting that you're going to go on learning throughout your life. It doesn't end when you've had your professional qualification or your university degree, even less now than it was then.
And of course, you were doing distance learning when it was old-fashioned correspondence, presumably.
It was, yes.
And these days, with the London School of Business and Finance, they pioneered distance learning using digital platforms and making information and materials available at the touch of a button. I think that's going to transform people's lives internationally, isn't it?
Well, I think you see it with children now. I mean, I look at my 3-year-old grandson, and he's already using tablets of one sort or another, using baby computers, accessing the internet. Now, none of that was available. Everything I had to learn was written, either from the library or from the correspondence courses I did. So today the whole world is open to young people on the internet and in a raft of other ways as well. That was never the case before.
We both benefited from what is these days grandly called widening participation, didn't we? Because that was the opportunity, that was the ladder out of your background, my background, into success in all sorts of different ways. Yours particularly in obviously moving into politics and becoming the Prime Minister of our country. We these days are torn, aren't we, between saying to people, don't go to university if you don't need to, and then in the next breath saying there's going to be a knowledge economy and we've got to compete globally. And I just wondered if you got a take on how we get that message across, particularly with professional qualifications like your own.
Well, I think the necessity for a ladder out of poverty is essential through education. Education is crucial. I've taken the view that for a very long time we have perhaps undervalued education. I'd like to see education a profession in which more university students with very good degrees aspire to go into. But there are a whole series of impediments at the moment that doesn't happen. But climbing out through education is the only route through. And at the moment, after 30 or 40 years, and governments of every sort can bear a share of the blame for this, there are people still trapped by circumstance who cannot climb out of the circumstances in which they are. And that is one of the biggest problems we have now in the future. We have to provide a way through. And for future generations, to prevent that becoming endemic, it's the education system that is the key.
Well, the London schools obviously got a wide range of degree and post-degree courses, but they've also concentrated on those professional management qualifications, CIMA and the ACCA, which you were very familiar with in the past, as well as creativity and arts. On this global scale, with the global economy that we're dealing with, the uncertainties as well as the challenges and the opportunities, do you have a particular message for young people in our country, but also right across the world, in terms of the lessons that you've learned?
Well, I think there's one point particularly I'd like to make about that. When one thinks of education, instinctively the mind leaps to classical forms of education and professional qualifications, accountancy, banking, the law. But just as valuable are the qualifications as an engineer, as a plumber, things like that. And I think we have undervalued those socially. And it seems to me extraordinary, really, when you consider the shortage we have of that sort of skills, that we have so many academic centres and relatively few centres that actually teach that sort of skill, which is crucial for ourselves. Every child isn't going to be gifted academically. They may be gifted manually. And I think we're undervaluing that. And that is a social change that is necessary. And we need to increase the social cachet of those skills and then provide the circumstances in which people can properly be educated in them.
And I've interviewed Ken Baker, Lord Ken Baker, who was, of course, a long-standing colleague of yours in government, and his initiative with the technology colleges, and the foothold that gives. And then people, you mentioned earlier, lifelong learning. It's a continuum, isn't it, where people are going to start off doing what they're good at and then discover that they've got all sorts of other talents that they can use during their lives.
Well, it is, but even if they stay in the same profession, it's a continuing learning cycle, because we have never lived in a world in which events and circumstances move on as swiftly as they do today. And that may be developing forms of law, it may be new technologies. Whatever aspect of life you are in, it is going to change and it's going to move forward. And either people become abreast of that, stay abreast of that, or they fall behind in their careers. So we do need people to understand from a very young age that learning does not end with the end of formal education. It will continue.
And it's good for them, it's good for our country, it's good for business.
For all of those things, crucial.
Sir John Major, I'm very grateful indeed for spending time with us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David.